everyone. Welcome back to the Creative Workshop, where we take a deep dive into the creative process. I am Max Randolph, and today joining me is my dear friend, Don Marshall.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me, Max. It feels weird doing like an official introduction, considering I was hugging you last weekend at NoCoCon, but this is lovely. Thank you so much for having me.
We finally got to meet for the first time in real life.
It was awesome. It was really, really awesome. I recommend you meet your friends in real life anytime you can.
And a little bit of background, if you're unfamiliar with our work together. Don Marshall put together this ragtag group of intrepid adventurers, tromping their way through a alternate timeline of Middle Earth that he wrote 200 pages of notes on. It's madness. It's chaos. It's wonderful.
All of the above. Yes. I will say, just as this is called the Creative Workshop, that sort of creativity does occasionally border on mania. I don't recommend anybody who's trying to get started in the TTRPG space. You do not need to write 200 pages of notes. I just had a lot of time on my hands, and I kept getting asked that question. But the result is a friendship that has been with me and you as well for almost 3 years now. So we've got a pretty good thing going, I think.
It's amazing how fast time flies when you're having fun, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, it's ridiculous to think that like I had this idea all of those, years ago, because it feels as though in a way we've only just started. But then I look back on those first few episodes. I'm like, oh, you poor sweet boy. You have no idea what you're doing. To myself, of course, just like no clue.
None of us had an idea. And that's the type of expose that we're here for.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You're not supposed to go into something knowing what you're doing. You got to take the leap.
Yeah, and I think that is like if we're going to get into it right now, the creative no, because truly, I think the most true thing that I have discovered about the creativity that I've been able to touch base with for myself in the last 3 years of my experience on TikTok and then with you for Unpredicted Party was I didn't know what I was doing, and I've been making it up as I go the entire time. And I'm fortunate enough that I was blessed with people around me that were able to give me good advice, but like I'm still flying by the seat of my pants 3 years later.
100%. No, we're seat pant flyers around here. Freaking flyer miles for sure.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Well, and so we got invited out to NoCoCon because for the last 2 years we've been playing this really fun world, creating interesting characters, but like even more interesting relationships between the two. It's been a blast, but that part I know about you, buddy. But I'm excited to dive a little bit more deep into your process, that mania that you're talking about. I'm very curious about you, buddy. So I'm coming with questions. So I know that you were a journalist in another life, or you currently are still.
I'm not currently, but in a way, I deliver the news. It's just extremely specific news about one very specific franchise now owned by multiple multi-billion-dollar corporations. It's a mess, but it works, I guess, ish.
Baby, if it's working.
I do often joke that like no one's told me to stop yet. Well, that's a lie. Lots of people have told me to stop, but they've all been for terrible and horrible reasons of like.
But more people are telling you to keep going. Is that?
Yeah.
There's a
more
balance.
People keep telling. Yeah, there is a balance. And I think there's a certain level of like fulfilling prophecies of like, all right, well, as soon as I get this many haters or this many successful, then I've reached that point. But yeah, it's been very strange watching that all happen.
Well, there's a quote out there somewhere, and I can't remember who it was. It was a famous writer. Blanking on him. The chat will go over it. You can go over it. But it's like if you're not making enemies, then you're not doing anything.
That quote is good for a certain subsect of people. I will just paraphrase and say that sometimes people who are fighting for the wrong things take that too much to heart, and like I'm basically saying that if you use the term woke unironically and are attempting to like get enemies and garner views and money and gathering enemies that way, not exactly a good idea. But I do think that there's a certain level of like you have to be able to stand up for yourself through the creative process because no one else is going to do it for you.
No, exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. And I think I feel like this new age clout chasing thing, this is very new.
Yeah.
This far predates that quote.
I think to a certain extent it is new in that they've figured out how to fast track monetizing it, because so much of the creative process for me was like rinse and repeat, trial and error. Like the true failure is what is for me that creative process. And I think the folks that attempt to jump into it, whether they have, good intentions or not, that is like, I am going to have a bazillion followers and I am going to talk about how much I hate this thing or how woke this thing is or how bad things have gotten so that we can shift back to something else. There's something to be said about like, okay, find that balance between figuring out your own voice and figuring out what are the thoughts in your head that other people gave you without like thinking critically about it.
For sure, man. And I like to just think about it as, making waves, making waves in regards of being devoted to an idea that has not yet been proven and people are still doubting you. Mm-hmm. And like that's, as a creative, that's such a wonderful thing to look back on. It's like, yeah, I was right. I was on to something. And, it makes all that pain, all that misunderstanding kind of worth it. And that's where I kind of take that quote a little bit further, a little bit in that direction. Is people don't believe in you when they can't see it yet. You got to make it.
Yeah. There's a really great line from a song called I Spy by Lil Yachty and, someone else, but it's the line is they can't see the vision. They must be out of focus. And I keep thinking about that. I keep going back to that song.
That's a great line,
right? Like it's almost the equivalent of you can't see the trees through the forest or something along those lines. Like when I started, we'll bring this back to Unpredicted Party. When I started Unpredicted Party, it was just the idea of what if I just wrote a one shot and we just played it out and like, okay, well, you all die. And that's the joke. Like it started out as like this joke campaign that it was like very much tongue in cheek. Like nobody was going to take it seriously. And then I'm like, hang on, there might be something here. And what's happening with all of the kingdoms? And like, it just continues to grow in my head. And to that end, I think the other thing I need to figure out is how to tell people to just do it even though you don't know what you're doing. Like I didn't know how to edit videos when I was 14 years old. I went onto YouTube and I found this lovely Indian gentleman who had like 1,000 15-second videos, how to get to green screen, how to chroma key green screen, Perfect. How to put thing in the background of green screen. And I'm self-taught basically to a lesser extent, but it's one of those things where you have to be able to fail.
Who needs to know anything nowadays in the world of YouTube?
Yeah, exactly.
You can just watch a 5-minute video.
Exactly. And I think there's something to be said about like being scared to do the creative process and failing because you don't know what to do. I am almost positive that if your hobby is digital in some way, shape, or form, there is someone else who has done something either similar or has done something adjacent to what you are trying to do and has put a tutorial of it on YouTube. It's great. I highly recommend YouTube all the time for
100%. When in doubt, right? And
yeah,
as somebody that is notoriously afraid to fail, this is all of you listening tonight or today. This is your creative license to fail. Between two creatives that have really taken shots in the dark, some of them land and most of them don't.
I got a question for you though. What has been your biggest failure? Because I know mine, but like, what is the thing that you look back on and say, ooh, okay, like you learned something from it, obviously, but
yeah. And this is something I really try to teach my students. I have an online online apprentice program.
Yeah. Some of them are on my Patreon and tell me about it. So I know all about it. You come highly recommended, Max.
Oh man. Well, and I tell them that there's no such thing as wasted time and there's no better teacher than a perceived failure. A failure doesn't exist. It's either in the works or it's a great learning experience.
Yeah.
Because, like imagine, we are totally diverging. This is great. But like imagine if everything you tried just perfect, boom, you might have learned one thing. Okay, this works. But if it's a calamity, if it crashes into a big fireball, I feel like you learned 15 things, that sure doesn't work. It's all good learning experiences. There's no such thing as wasted time.
No, fully agree on that one.
But speaking of not wasting your time, so I'm trying to circle back to my original.
Let's circle back. Let's hard reset. This is the beautiful thing about having your own podcast with two neurodivergent people. We go off on tangents, and goal is to just eventually we wind up picking the best parts. That's why I don't do live streams for Unpredicted Party, because so often I'm like, all right, we got to cut that. We're on a tangent. We got to stop here, there, and go. We reset.
No. Baby, this is gold. But yes, reset, come back to center. So being a journalist, being a well-trained seeker of knowledge, networking, all that, how did that prepare you to your creative ventures today?
Oh, well, it actually does circle back to failure, because so much of my time as a reporter was figuring out my own voice. And then realizing through my own sort of journalistic skills that I didn't really have one in journalism. And I think that was sort of why I was unhappy, and why I am so much happier doing my creative stuff here on TikTok. Full disclosure, I do still work a full-time job. So like the creative process is like a hobby for me, that I am fortunate enough to be able to sell enough t-shirts that this can, fund the next one project funds another that funds another. But it's an absolutely wild thing to look back on my time as a journalist and think, okay, my job for a decade basically was, you need to take a very complex idea, figure everything out about it, and make it palatable for a 1-minute, 30-second story within a half-hour newsreel. And that means, from start to finish, you get to the newsroom, you collect all of your gear, you make sure that the people you called yesterday to set up the interviews are there. And then you drive, sometimes for me, it's like an hour and a half, because I worked in a very rural area for my first journalism gig. And it became like that. Not a grind, because I don't want to, glorify grind culture, because I think that's just sort of some toxic capitalism stuff. But there is a certain level of putting the hours in, even if you're not necessarily doing what you want, because I'm fortunate enough that the skills that I had as a journalist translated to TikTok so well, because now most of my job on TikTok is, hey, describe this very complex idea within the Lord of the Rings and give it to me in a minute 30 in a much larger narrative. So like, it's almost like doing the same job, which I love. So I think that in a way was like sort of teeing me up to take that next step.
Isn't that fascinating? Something that you would almost imagine completely unrelated, we're actually so akin. Mm-hmm. And you brought up a really excellent point of just how unhappy you can be while being voiceless.
Yeah. There was, if we want to get into that one, that's a huge thing that I was wrestling with, that I remember very vividly having conversations with my wife about pre-TikTok. There was this weird lull between being a journalist, the onset of the pandemic, and leaving the journalism industry for about 4 or 5 months. I just kind of looked at myself and I went, I'm not happy. I'm burnt out. And I am so ready to find out what makes me happy next. But I didn't know what it was, and I was looking for it desperately. I was, in the same way that I now understand my ADHD so much more, I can look back on that and say, oh yeah, well, I was clearly in the midst of a hyperfixation. And for a long time, my job was my hyperfixation, and all of my anxieties and my fears and my energy went into that. And as soon as that was gone, I went, uh-oh, we've got a problem. And so I literally I think it's fair to say I've quite literally reinvented myself a few times over the course of the last few
And
years.
You should. That's the adventure.
You
baby.
absolutely should. Absolutely should. There's a great quote by Stephen Fry that's like, if you know, or no, maybe it was Stephen Fry quoting Oscar Wilde or something, but it was like, if you know what you want to be when you grow up, that is your curse, because you're cursed to be that thing forever.
Yes.
And I was so in that mindset of like, I am going to be a journalist. I am going to go overseas and teach myself Arabic and take those classes in college and become like the CNN or the MSNBC or whatever the case may be.
You're going to be the guy.
I was going to be the guy, and that's what I wanted to be. And then it got to the point where I'm like, oh, being the guy is not what I thought it would be. I got everything I wanted, except it sucks. So oops.
Sometimes also worst case scenario, you go through maybe all this schooling, you go through the university, and all of a sudden you get your dream position that you end up hating.
Yep, that was me. That was 100% me. And in the moment though, I don't think I realized that I was not happy there, because there's a certain comfort in I'll use this word, vindication. There's a certain vindication in the creative process of being rewarded of, I did go to college for this and I did get my major in this. And now I have that major and it's in my field and I'm self-taught and I am so much better than all of those other, those old people that don't know how to edit the stuff. And I have to show them how to work the camera and I can do everything myself. What I didn't realize at the time is that I was burning myself out doing the work that should have been done by 6 other people and going through, and I don't know if you suffer with this as a blacksmith, but creative burnout was so big for me.
Baby, we can definitely talk about some creative burnout. Also I want to throw this in there, buddy. It's like, how could I possibly complain when all of my dreams on paper have come true? I'm here. I'm the guy.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, why am I miserable?
Yeah. You don't like
I grew up, like to get here, I worked several jobs, working as a welder in mechanic shops. And, since I was like a young teen, like 13, working on construction sites, cleaning up lumber. And I was always very blue collar. And, I was surrounded by wildly creative, brilliant brains, like creative problem solving savants that a lot of them were in misery and they had all these great ideas. And I think what this conversation is constantly going to allude to, I can see where this is going to go, buddy, is if you feel this way, you listening right now, if you feel this way at all, have that hobby, have that creative outlet and just go for it. Be okay with it failing, You're going to learn something, but also like to Don Marshall's, to point is like, it can just be a hobby that is wildly fulfilling to your soul, your creative soul.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so funny you bring that up because I feel as though we've had adjacent, experiences. A majority of the journalism industry is bright, young, bushy-tailed 20-somethings who think they're going to change the world, or the burnt-out creatives that are in their, 40s and 50s that have been there sometimes at the same station for 30 or 40 years, and they're not having a good time. Like I was working with one guy at a radio station, like 10 years ago. And he's like, this is just sort of a pit stop for me. I want to have my own show. I'm really into science. And he's still there at that news radio station. And, he's done a couple of things on the side and, he never really took that leap. And I still think about him because, I hope he is happy and I hope he has, that sort of fulfillment. But, as you said, if anybody here is listening that is like willing to try and test the waters for maybe my hobby can be something more, it doesn't need to be creating money from that thing. I think a lot of times what people are looking for is community. Like I would be perfectly fine not live streaming the Unpredicted Party, playing with you all, introducing you to the other group chats I go to cons with, because like that sort of becomes the community that I needed. I didn't play TTRPGs 5 years ago. I didn't go to cons 5 years ago. I have quite literally changed my life doing the things that I like to do because on the side, I'm like, I wonder if anybody will watch this. And if I will always say, if you stream for like 10 people, You can keep streaming, invite those 10 people on your stream, do a co-stream, form a collective, I'm basically trying to, make communism a thing, but for creatives. Not actually, but like, yeah.
Community is very fulfilling. It's wildly fulfilling. We're communal creatures. I feel like, we're dealing with a lot of just chronic loneliness across the board, across everybody, even though this thing is able to bring us all together, it also somehow brings us apart. I don't know. It's weird. We can talk about that for hours.
I think there is something to be said about people trying to get over the hurdle of, I don't want to just have internet friends, because I think had NoCoCon not happened, there would have been a time for us to all meet together. But I think we are lucky enough that the creative process has taken us far enough. And I say this as an incredibly privileged person with a large following on the internet. You yourself are the same way. But things can happen. And it's the greatest joy I think I've had in my life. Easily top 10.
And fully agreed. Like these last couple of years of being online and all this stuff has changed my life for the better. My empathy, my kindness has risen. Like it's made me a way better person. Because
for sure,
being isolated is just no good for the soul.
No. I will say, I think knowing a couple of people who do have some pretty severe agoraphobia, the pandemic, if we want to get really into it, I think the pandemic gave us all like a mindset shift when it comes to creativity, because we were stuck in our houses. We couldn't leave and like go to music festivals where we can let loose, or, people with children, we can't go to the arts and crafts fair or, go socialize with others. And so we sort of internalized that creativity, and the internet became, and if we're being honest, TikTok became that place to show and tell.
Well, and you cannot contain the human being's proclivity to create. That's what we do. It doesn't matter what it is, but that's why we're so special. Humans create. And when, oh my gosh, people say like, I wish I was creative. Oh my God, I roll my eyes. Of course you are. You're just creative in some way. It could be spreadsheets.
And that's the thing, I think. And it's so funny you mentioned spreadsheets, because I think there's a certain level of like shame that people feel. Because for me personally, I was very much like, I wanted to be that business professional journalist that dressed in a suit every day. My nickname at my station was 3-piece, because I loved wearing the 3-piece suits so much.
I've seen you dress up. I've seen you out there on the dance floor.
I like to suit up a little bit. It's nice. And it sort of was like, okay, this is my thing. This is what I'm going to do. But there came a certain point when I'm like, this does not feel authentic to me. And I think I really struggled with that authenticity because, and this is digging way deep down, there was a certain sense of like, I had other people's expectations of what I was supposed to be, but it wasn't anyone in particular. It was just like, I shouldn't get a tattoo in Elvish on my arm. People will think I'm weird.
Well, and it's funny because it was probably no one's spoken opinion. It was your internal opinion of what they might
for
think.
Sure. For sure. Like if I very consciously was like, I'm not doing tattoos, because if I'm talking to like the governor of the state that I was, being a journalist in, and I've worked in a couple states and I've been lucky to interview a couple of governors, if I have my sleeves rolled up and he sees a tattoo that looks, vaguely reminiscent of something he doesn't understand, but enough that's like, what is that thing? I wanted to be that professional guy. And I almost felt myself, like masking, I think, you want to get really deep into it. I think the true way to find that creative potential, to unlock it, is to lean into what makes you uncomfortable. Because the thing that made me uncomfortable was, I don't want anyone to think I'm weird. And now that I have leaned into that weird, a bunch of other people like that I do that. And it's very fulfilling.
People are starving for authenticity. Authenticity is one of the treasures of what makes human beings human beings. And I think post-pandemic, now that we brought that up, oh my goodness, like people are just dying for good, real authenticity, because that allows for connection, I feel like. Either from like a creator to an audience, whatever.
Yeah, well, I think even creator to creator, because there's a stitch on TikTok going around, which if TikTok is no longer a thing 5 years from now, a stitch is when you take someone else's video for like 5 seconds, you play that, and then you create your own video attached to it. It's like the video responses on YouTube. For those of you sort of ancient primordials that were there in the heydays of like 2006, 2007 YouTube, the quote is that you stitch, say the weird thing, people are desperately seeking realness. And I am a freelance social media consultant on the side sometimes, and I constantly tell people the reason your social media is not picking up is because there is not a person. There is one person typing and people don't know that it's a person. Look at what the Washington Post did. There's a guy named Dave and he runs the Washington Post TikTok channel. I don't know the Washington Post. I don't read it, but I do know that Dave is there and I do know that he makes good content and that to a lesser extent, he is a face of the Washington Post. And everybody needs to do that on their own social media because it has to be authentic. There has to be people and people have to drive it.
Yeah, because just starving for that connection.
Yeah.
But before we spiral too far,
Yes, sorry, we've gotten so far off.
No, it's a good, like, hey, when our powers combine, man. But I do have questions for you.
Let's do it.
So before you mentioned like this silly idea, it's then the whole party dies, right? But then it's like, oh, but what's happening with the kingdoms? But what then's happening with that character and this relationship? And now maybe those ties have been severed. When writing a story, now this is going out for all the storytellers, if you're writing a novel or even just your own, TTRPG. When writing a story, Don, do you start small, like on a single character and work your way out? Or do you start with like a kingdom and work your way in?
Oh, God, this is the cop-out answer. But I truly do believe anyone within the creative process should start where they are the most excited. And I will give you, it's not one specific point. Some people enjoy that process of, all right, I start big, I finish small, or I have, the basic idea, but I don't even know where to begin. It literally is, I say this, I was going to say it's as simple as, but it's not simple because it is quite literally the hardest thing you will ever do. Think about it for a really long time. I sat on the Unpredicted Party's original concept for like 2 months, but every single time I was in the shower, I wonder what's going on there. I didn't write down a thing. I was literally just throwing out ideas in my brain, and I'm lucky enough that we're still going. I still do that. There are lines of dialogue that I have stored away in my head that I thought in the shower one time, like 6 months ago, oh, that's really good. I got to write that down somewhere. And I've got like 4,000 notes in my notes app. You actually write it down? I do. Well, I write down these little nuggets. Well, it's not even that I write it down and then I explore the idea, because sometimes I'll write down the idea and I'll be like, yeah, I'll come back to that one later, but it doesn't stick in my head. And then there are other times when I have an idea and I need to run with it. And my advice to anyone when you are starting that story, run with it. Even if it doesn't make sense, follow the through line, because in truly finding out where the creative process starts, it needs to be in what makes you the most excited. So when they take the Eagles to Mordor, for the Unpredicted Party, the question that I ask myself is, well, what happens to Sauron? If the eagle has the ring and is ruling Middle Earth as a bird overlord, which was the entire premise, where is Sauron? And in my head, that's where I started. So, and this is somewhat of a spoiler for people that maybe haven't listened to the Unpredicted Party, but it's fine. Honestly, I think they'll get the picture. Sauron is in another form. I took a couple of creative liberties and was like, all right, so Sauron is in the Paths of the Dead with the Nazgul in his own temple, because he tried to go back to Dol Guldur, which happened in like a very early episode you were all in there with. He tried to find the Balrog, which didn't work out because the Balrog didn't side with him. And then he went back to the Paths of the Dead and is now chilling in his little sort of cathedral area with the Nazgul, trying to, plot his next move like an evil villain. Ha ha ha.
Well, if you're going to be writing a villain, you got to have it's important to have their adventure set out a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I did. I wrote an adventure for something that was not the main story. And I think in creating that little side character, or that sort of, oh, well, if that's happening here, and if people are sort of seeing that there is activity going on in the Paths of the Dead, what's happening in Rohan? And so that led me to the whole Rohan arc of, okay, well, if things go horribly wrong, what's Grima doing? What are the bad guys doing? Well, Grima's seizing power. Theoden's dead. Eomer's in jail. Okay, well, where does that leave Eowyn, one of the quintessential characters of the story? Oh, well, she had to get out. It was not safe for her to be in Edoras. She's got to go into hiding, reform the Shield Maidens of Rohan, and she does that. And so I wrote these stories just like as little tidbits of like Eowyn, ... reforming Shield Maidens. And that was it. That's like the extent of, and sorry, I know I'm going off on a tangent, but like when you look at the Fellowship of the Ring movie, one of the best things that I ever heard was the Fellowship runs down the stairs. It's the scene in the Mines of Moria where there's that big staircase and they have to jump because there's a chasm and there's the orcs firing at them. The only thing in the script is the Fellowship runs down the stairs. And if I'm remembering correctly, Peter Jackson wrote that part, and then Fran and Philippa were like, okay, how do we make that creative? Or maybe it was Peter Jackson doing that, but like something as simple as the Fellowship runs down the stairs. Cool. What obstacle is in their way? How are they going to overcome it? It's an acrobatics check for those that
arguably one of the most entertaining and nail-biting moments in the entire stinking movie.
In the whole trilogy. I think the Mines of Moria is one of the most well-done set pieces in cinema history, and certainly in the trilogy.
Absolutely.
But it comes from such a small idea, right? Mine is that literally the tagline on a poster, which for those of you listening, I'm holding it up on screen, I have next to me. It's, they took the Eagles to Mordor. Now what? And so like, I guess if we're talking about where does the story start, find the tagline that works for you. Eowyn has reformed the Shield Maidens of Rohan. How does that story start? Sauron is no more. How does that story start?
And what's really cool is how the universality of all that. You know, that is such a universal thing because like let's take the rolling Hobbit door, right? You know, it's like, okay, they want a door and they want it round. Oh, yeah, then it could roll. Oh, but how does it roll? Oh, but then it has to go this. Oh, and then how do I power it? It's amazing how an idea can fractal from just one source of passion.
And you have to let it fractal.
Yeah, it's almost like a trunk of a tree, right? You start with the trunk and then you don't just go to a branch. That's silly. No, you start the trunk and you go to a limb, you go out to a leaf. You know, it just keeps going and going. You got to start somewhere, and passion is a great place to start. Great answer,
and I think thank you. I think the idea of like passion, especially for me, someone who is neurodivergent, is following the idea that makes you the happiest. But like there is, we've been talking a lot about like writing and acting and how I do that. But I think there is something to be said, because I have a lot of artist friends that I've worked with on Unpredicted Party. Sometimes the story can be told in just like a little image. Great example of this before we move on to the next thing. There is a Magic the Gathering card for the Gifts of Galadriel. And it's this resplendent version of Galadriel on like a throne, and she's all like draped in elven cloth and finery and just sitting on this tree throne. It's beautiful. But I'm like, okay, cool. That doesn't necessarily give me Galadriel vibes. What's happening here? And what's going on in the background is they have basically made it as Galadriel sort of like sitting there tired after having gone through the process with Frodo and collecting the gifts. And the gifts are scattered throughout the artwork in the card. So you can see the daggers that she gives to the hobbits to her left. And there's the Lothlorien cloaks piled one on top of another. And there's the file of Galadriel off to her, off on a shelf somewhere. And it's like the ability to tell the story from just these little nuggets, I think, is truly where my creative process begins.
Oh, God, I love this, buddy.
It's beautiful.
Okay,
yeah,
so let's stay in the same vein.
Let's do it.
What is your favorite element of a story?
Oh, God. It's such a hard question to answer, because how many different elements are there of a story? But I think
infinite.
Yeah, there's it fractals.
Do you want to
bring it back to that? Yeah, please.
Well, I mean, this might help get those creative juices flowing.
Yeah, no, I definitely need the juices flowing.
So, for me, it's characters. I love characters, but not just characters. It's the relationship. It's that negative space between the characters where the growth happens, where empathy can take place, where hatred might grow. Who knows? But it's that magneticism between two characters. That's my favorite thing.
I think for me, as much as I love characters, from a certain point of view, it doesn't necessarily need to be a character. Sometimes it can be an object. Sometimes it can be a something inanimate, something not living, something not even of this world or of our imaginations.
Like the sword of ice, for instance.
Yeah, something like that. Like, I think it's the aha moment of, I'll give you an example of this one. Yeah, I do that voice, that ooh in the Unpredicted Party a lot.
You do.
When my players have ideas that mesh with mine. And I think there's, to your point, the characters and the relationships between them. The example I will give is Kate Osborne, our dear friend who plays Eowyn in the Unpredicted Party. We were in a session in Isengard. I had trapped you guys in Isengard, and I was like, all right, what am I going to have them do? Because spoiler alert, they were there unattended and they were not supposed to be. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. But I was like, okay, how do I change the story here? And Katie did this absolutely amazing thing where like, hey, can I go into this room? I'm like, cool, room. What's interesting about the room? What is that moment? And I think it was something along the lines of, all right, I need to give Eowyn agency in this moment. What is good about Eowyn in this room, or what is bad about Eowyn in this room that will propel the story forward, that will be creative? And I often say, especially in TTRPGs, it is the stuff that I throw in your way as obstacles, whether emotionally or physical obstacles, that create those moments that you look for. So I go for the aha moment of, all right, what issue are they going to run into? And spoiler alert, Wormtongue stole a bunch of Eowyn's stuff and was keeping it in his room in Isengard. And so that created a whole dynamic with Katie where she was now forced to have these interactions with these characters and is wrestling with all of these thoughts about like feminism and what it means to have agency within her own story. Cause like there was a really sacred sword that this guy just like often took for himself. And like, it's those moments, I think, that create the, this is the part of the story. This is the conflict. It's not necessarily conflict, but it is the idea of something hasn't gone right. I need to figure out why.
Well, it's amazing just how the Fellowship goes downstairs, how much can happen in those stairs. Like you went in the room, right?
Yeah, in the room. It's well, I'll give you this one that maybe even a better example. I had in that same episode the chair that you guys had to. So, a little bit of backstory for those that maybe aren't fully caught up. In my mind, Saruman has sort of like a dining room where he sits and he talks with someone and they're having wine. And if he doesn't like that person or he plans to betray them, underneath one of the chairs is a cave where he can just keep them captive forever. And in my head, that was fairly, of course that happened. But like, it occurred to me that you guys would have no idea how my brain works. And so watching that aha moment, that watching a click of like, this is not an ordinary chair. What are the obstacles that we need to sort of climb over physically to find the solution?
But everyone loves a puzzle, because it's an obstacle to overcome. It's almost an enemy.
It is. Yeah. I hesitate to say that everything is an obstacle, because, sometimes things are there to help you. But you can kind of treat it as like, all right, this is the boss. It's a chair. It doesn't have hit points, but it does have a weakness. And in order to find that weakness, I need to do various things. And like, I take my creative process in very much the same way. Like I've done sponsorship deals with various brands. And I'm like, all right, cool. I have to have my own spin on how I can sell this to other people because I like the product. I think they will like the product, but also, and I don't know if you've dealt with this, Max, the people that are selling the thing or that want me to sell the thing have lots of other ideas. And it's finding that balance and that harmony of like, do you think we can do this together? Is there something to do together? And I always encourage the creative process to be done with other people, even if it's just a phone call. It is so important.
Well, there needs to be room for your authenticity. Back to authenticity. Like it can't feel contrived.
Yeah. And I think so many of the larger, like corporations that I've worked with, I will just put this out there. I have done, full disclosure, I have done deals with Amazon, HBO, Audible, all those folks. They have been great. I will say there are a couple of like middle market sized, corporations that I've worked with that have been like, yeah, we really want you to say these words. I'm like, okay, that reeks of a TV commercial and my audience has quite literally trained themselves. If it says sponsored in the bottom left-hand corner, I swipe away. If they start using words like synergy and like I feel as though I am reading an ad, I have trouble getting into it. And I have gone back to people and I have lost 4-figure deals that I've basically said, hey, look, this is not my brand. This is not like your ad will fail on my channel if we do this. And they're like, okay, that's fine. We'll go a different direction. And, I of course, I wish them all the best. And if they come back and they want to say, we liked your idea, let's try it again. It is truly something to, maintain that authenticity that I think allows people to truly connect with the creative process.
Yeah. And it's so funny because a lot of these corporations are really behind and trying to catch up on how the internet and the way we communicate is organically growing.
And I think bring it back to it. The Washington Post does a great job of that. There's Dave. Dave is an ad. For those of you that are not aware of what the Washington Post TikTok is, that is an ad. The fact that they are paid to do it and he has a lot of fun doing it too, all the better for the Washington Post because they have cracked that code in such a way that like now they are one of the most widely recognized online publications, even though they were a newspaper and they still are a newspaper. But like, their tagline is, we are a newspaper, but they're not, right? They are a digital multimedia company that used to be a newspaper, and being able to evolve and adapt is huge in that.
Yes. Okay. I'm going to bring it back. You mentioned your creative process. Mm-hmm. Don Marshall, do you have any rituals that helps you get prepared to be creative?
Yeah, well, it's hard for me personally to prepare to be creative. I'll give you the unpredicted party example, but then I'll also give you like the backside of it, which is I really loved writing those 150-ish pages of notes that spiraled into way more. That was a joy for me. I would have done that for fun. The fact that I was able to create it into a TTRPG was fine. But it was never sort of like the end goal when I started. But I think ritualistically, I have to have that moment of spark that says, I'm ready to do this now. But I get to that point through sometimes days and weeks of struggling through it. And I don't know if you're like this or if anyone else listening to this can relate, but like I will literally say, I should really, I should edit the episode. Full disclosure, I still have not edited the Unpredicted Parties episode for what is airing like exactly 6 days from when we record this. It's episode 59, I think, where you're meeting up with everybody in Gondor. I still haven't done it, but I am deep in my creative process enough to know that even though I don't feel like doing it now, I know I will. I think further down the line, I thrive on not deadlines, but I thrive on the thrill of the last minute, the behind the 8 ball. Let's see how good I can do in this 8-hour span.
There needs to be like urgency.
Yeah, there does need to be some urgency. And I think I have typically equated it to, going back to TTRPGs, the spell slots. Some people call it spoon theory. There's a number of different things that you can sort of refer to it as. But like when I am trying to be creative, I look down at my computer or my list of things that I need to do and say, okay, that email that I need to send is a level 1 spell slot and it's not going to give me creative fulfillment. But editing the unpredicted party, that's a level 4 spell slot, but so is cooking dinner. So I have to sort of ask myself, okay, do I have 2 second level spell slots that I will not be able to get back that day? Can I cook dinner and can I edit the unpredicted party? Now,
what a terrific way to visualize that.
Yeah. I've sort of attached myself to that sort of idea of the creative process is whatever you are capable of doing that day. And it is in knowing yourself that that creative process comes out the best. I know that my best work with the Brennan Lee Mulligan episode came out because I sat down 5 minutes after the recording was done on Zoom and stayed up until 3 o'clock in the morning editing it.
When you were still fired up.
When I was still fresh and ready to go. Had I been up for like 20 hours at that point, stressing to see whether or not we would have a good episode and rewriting everything? Yes, constantly. And I was also in the process kicking myself because I didn't ask Brennan when he needed to leave. I thought we had him for another 2 hours. So I was gearing up for combat, ready to go. We were going to have a whole moment. And then suddenly, whoops. But because of that, I was like really down on myself and I just felt that struggle. And so like after I had that like 2 o'clock intense, again, almost mania session, I went, oh my God, it's terrible. Look at what you wanted to do versus what you got. And I didn't go back to it for weeks. Luckily we had a buffer and, you know, the show airs every 2 weeks. So I had like probably a good month or so to edit it, but I sat down for like days on end, like, all right, today is the day I'm going to do it. And like literally forcing myself to. And I went, this isn't fun anymore. But it's a Brennan Lee Mulligan episode. How on earth could you not want to edit that? But in my brain, I went, this is terrible. This is awful. So it was truly the first time. And keep in mind, this was like 3 or 4 months ago that I discovered all of this. It was the first time I allowed myself to say, it'll get done when it gets done. Which is why I am so hesitant, I think, to try and monetize a lot of my stuff, because unless I give myself a deadline, things happen when I feel creative. But I have to have thought about it a lot or put myself through that like artistic torture, and only realizing after years of therapy and having friends such as yourself and the community that I've been fortunate enough to be surrounded by, it's okay to not have that creative process and work on other stuff. I have a whole set of Warhammer minis. You can see them in the top right-hand corner of the screen right now. That's my one army of tree people. I have a whole nother army of super buff dudes with armor, which is my other hyperfixation. Half of them are painted. I'm not going to go paint them because no one needs to have them painted except myself. And I don't feel passionate about it right now, but I know I'll come back to it.
And there's always, oh man, you brought up so many good points just now.
Thank you. Sorry, I tend to ramble about that sort of thing when I get passionate.
You're good. Well, we love passion around here. Well, yeah, there's not like we talk a lot about, especially when we were talking about The Artist's Way, did a series. It's a book called The Artist's Way, and it talks about your inner critic. And just like, wow, the things that you could say to yourself that you would never allow anybody to ever utter physically. So, like the way we could beat ourselves down and like trying to force yourself to be creative. Like that is one of the hardest things. And you brought up just yet another great point of just like this. I got to play with Brennan Lee Mulligan. And how am I having such a hard time editing this? I should be grateful. I should be so ecstatic. But
I didn't feel that. I didn't feel that at all at that time. I was very much beating myself. Like if my wife came up to me and said, Don, your episode with Brennan Lee Mulligan is bad. You did not check for how long he had, and therefore the episode suffered because of it. If she said that, I would be in tears. I said that to myself. And I allowed myself to do that. And my inner critic, I am always my worst critic. I am always, but in a way, because I have, again, years of therapy, years of the creative process, years of trial and error and failure, because I have gone through that process, I know that no matter how terrible it is when I see something, it's never as bad to anyone else. Even if it's not bad, because I can think something is great, but I can still think, oh, I could have done that better. Like that whole saying of an artist's work is never done comes directly from the idea of self-doubt and being your own worst critic. And so you do quite literally need that community. You absolutely need it.
These conversations right here, when it comes to mental health and being a creative, and which is all of you that are listening to this, but like it's really important to be able to hear vulnerability when it comes to, the creative process and things like that. I want to tell you, buddy, I'm very grateful for your vulnerability.
Thank you. Yeah. And I'm grateful to be able to do it within a community that does not make me feel shame for it. I think there's a certain level of like, oh God, am I allowed to swear on this podcast, or should I find a different analogy?
Who knows?
Okay, cool. Yeah. So sometimes I'll phrase it this way. I think sometimes things get so lost in the technical aspect of what it means to be a creative. Do you have a TikTok? Do you have an Instagram? Are you live streaming on Twitch? Are you doing all of the things you need to do to be creative? I urge anyone that is listening to this, do one thing and start there. I have quite literally been building the tracks before the train as I go. I'll give you another great example. When my wife and I were releasing our first piece of merchandise, it came from the first time a video of mine went viral. And it was the Yeet Isildur joke. Someone who goes by Pudding who is a follower of mine. Pudding, if you're watching, how's it going? Hope you're well. I think he's on your Patreon, which is why I'm saying it, because there's a non-0% chance he'll come on to this. If he's not, you should all join. The whole idea of Yeet Isildur. Why didn't Isildur just get thrown into the lava, which may or may not be the next Unpredicted Party episode or series, who knows? But like, that idea was silly enough that I made a video about it. And because I made a video about it, I think at the time I had like 10, 15,000 followers. And this was great. I was just making a silly video. And then someone on there, I don't even remember who, and then multiple people agreed with this person. It's like, can I get that on a t-shirt? I think that's hilarious. And I'm like, all right, cool. What does it take to make a t-shirt? And so my wife went out and bought a $200 Cricut, and we were going to sell like 10 t-shirts. Well, I make the t-shirts, and I'm like, this is going to take too long. If we sell 50, and that's thinking, hopefully, then I'm going to be at this for days. I have to ship everything myself. Let's go find, a third party vendor that can help us with all that. We do. I am fortunate enough to be still with them with Spring. Had no idea what it took to make t-shirts. That video of me selling the t-shirts went viral. I woke up to 500,000 views and several $1,000s in sales. And I had no idea what I was doing. I was making it up as I go. I wasn't even on Instagram at the time. Don Marshall didn't have an Instagram or a Twitter or a YouTube or anything. I was literally just on TikTok making silly videos for some silly Lord of the Rings fans. And that silly Lord of the Rings fan was me. And I made it up as I go.
Well, you started at the passion, right?
Yeah.
You started there.
Yeah.
And then it fractaled out. And you just never know where those branches will grow.
You don't. You truly don't. And I think you have to be okay with it not going the way you want it to. Because like my end goal, I would tell people on this like 3 or 4 years ago, or actually, just about 3 years ago when I was starting, people would ask me like, what do you want to do? It's like, you want to talk to Stephen Colbert? You want to do stuff with Peter Jackson or Amazon? I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm going to be. I'm going to write my own TTRPG, I'm going to write my own like version of the Silmarillion, and I'm going to make it an animated series, and I'm going to do all of this stuff and delusions of grandeur. And like, I haven't done that, but I always told people, give me 5 years. Well, we're 3 years into it. I don't have the faintest idea how to even do that now. Wouldn't know where to start, but I do know that if the time comes and that is something that I am either offered or I want to then do, I have the presence of mind enough to know sometimes you gotta just go with it and see what happens. And it's led to no joke. It has led to this. It has led to us recording this podcast because Unpredicted Party came from all of that.
Well, and how boring would it be if we were just born with a roadmap? Like, it's an adventure, dang it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's so nice to be able to do that adventure, not knowing what comes next. Like, I know I know I want to find the buried treasure. I do not know what is in there when I open the chest.
And there's like a million buried treasures. There's so many avenues to go to find success or whatever your version of happiness looks like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay. let's circle back yet again, around again.
Yes, let's do it. Let's do it.
To storytelling. Now, I'm curious about your opinion on how do you feel about new takes on old stories, on old content?
Oh.
I don't want this to be too big. But
no, please.
Because that's what we're doing. We're taking Lord of the Rings that was written way back when, and then we're making it our own and making it fun. How do you feel about that?
It's so interesting for me to watch creative storytelling happen in 2024. I'll give you this example. Game of Thrones was a TV show that is arguably one of the most successful programs of all time. Easily one of HBO's, if not the best or biggest one, compared to The Sopranos. And people wanted more of the same. Game of Thrones didn't necessarily end the way most people were expecting, but we still loved the universe. We loved the story. We loved the themes of it. And so when House of the Dragon comes along and the same themes are there, and it's this sort of grim, dark, brutal, realistic look at what your sort of medieval times are going to look like, and then you add some dragons. Sure. What is the most iconic thing about Game of Thrones? It's not Daenerys Targaryen. It's not Jon Snow. It's the world of Westeros. It's the dragons. It's the legend of the Iron Throne. I think it was Brendan Lee Mulligan actually that said there's a reason that the map of Middle Earth is the thing you see everywhere and not like Aragorn's face. It is this theme that you need to stick with. And I think there's this weird, almost a dichotomy, but it feels more like two opposite ends of the spectrum fighting with each other, where these multi-billion-dollar corporations especially are trying these new things with similar themes and missing the mark for some of the important stuff, which is where I think in a big way those smaller communities are sort of taking over. You look at, people like us who are telling a story in Middle Earth. If J.R.R. Tolkien could see what I do, I have no doubt he would hate it. This goes against so much of his lore, but I saw, and I think a lot of people saw, the need for queer representation in Middle Earth and people of color's representation in Middle Earth. And again, for the record, I fully acknowledge that I didn't know what I was doing. And we are 5 white people at a TTRPG. I've been fortunate enough to have some very talented people of color and people who are in the queer community come to our space and grace us with their presence. But, there's a certain level of self-awareness that I think you have to have when you're telling a story, because the themes are what make the story. You can tell the Star Wars story over and over again, and Disney did. You have a character, they are in a location, they are going through a struggle. It's the hero's journey story, basically. And I think so long as you can, stick to the themes, you can do whatever you want. You can have whatever. I have broken the Lord of the Rings canon more than Rings of Power 1,000 times over. Now, I'm not a multi-billion-dollar company and our production is not nearly as big. However, the people that show up and enjoy that kind of story are the ones that know I'm extrapolating. We're being a little silly. But I think that's the heart of it, is if you can capture the theme of something that already existed, you're already 90% of the way there.
100%. I couldn't agree more. Now, okay. Let me think here.
Go ahead. I'm ready.
Don Marshall, when we're talking about storytelling, do you enjoy or dread the lack of control when it comes to collaborative storytelling?
Oh, I used to dread it. I really did. I will say I have learned so much as a lore master doing the Unpredicted Party, because I learned to trust others. And I think when you're trying to be creative, there is this hope that you can do it all yourself, that, you don't need a multi-billion-dollar corporation's help to do that, or you don't need anybody else's input because you want the vision to be yours. My vision sucked. In a nutshell, the Unpredicted Party, the way I wrote it, was bad. It was too serious. It was too long. It was going into too many obscure details that people didn't care about except me, because that was what I cared about.
You're an echo chamber.
You all came. I became my own worst enemy in that sense because I was echo chambering myself. But at a certain point, and if I'm being honest, it was the funeral episode where you all decided to switch body. We pulled a little Freaky Friday switcheroo during a very large funeral episode in the Unpredicted Party. That was the first moment, truly 20 episodes in, about a year of work going into it. And I went, oh, these people have my best interest at heart because they like this thing that I'm doing, but I'm not doing it anymore. They're doing it. So they have their best interest at heart. And okay, this is the creative process. And I truly believe it is quintessential to find other people to work with and gain that trust with those people, because you can create something significantly better with others than you can alone. There's nothing wrong with starting solo. I want to be very clear. You can have an idea. You can keep it. Yeah. Let it flower. Let it bloom. Yeah. Keep the plant in the small pot, but then don't be afraid to take out that plant and put it in a garden with your other plants. That way, you can create that beautiful horticulture.
I don't know. I instantly think of like a novelist, right? Sitting alone, creating these complex characters and their relationships with each other, this living and breathing world. How do they work with somebody else to like give different perspectives? So they're not in an echo chamber and tone deaf and all that. You know what I mean?
This is so funny that you bring up authors specifically, because I have an author friend who is fortunate enough to be a bestseller. And she texted me once years ago and said, hey, did we have a conversation ages ago about you having a geologist friend? And I do. I have a friend who is not in the online space, but is going to now be, I believe, a curator at a museum of archaeology. And I had mentioned that to her in passing. She needed to figure out how to create a throne out of a certain material, and if it was physically possible for these shapes to be carved because of the way the mineral works. So she is reaching out to me. I am reaching out to this third party and being like, I have an author friend who has a question about a specific type of rock. Do you know the answer to this? And he did. And he sent like 4 paragraphs worth of data that he knew just off the top of his head. And I sent that along. And so like when you think of like the Stephen Kings and the Neil Gaimans and the Brandon Sandersons, it's not them sitting there having the best ideas and becoming bestsellers. It is bouncing very often silly ideas off of each other and thinking, I wonder if that'll work. And if it does, it does. And if it doesn't, don't worry about it. You'll get them next time, champ.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know. Like it's so funny because my DM adventure, learning curve, however you want to say it, very similar. I was a railroader. I had literally every rock memorized. I knew exactly where it's just everything, like the landscape and what every character had in their like inventory, just down to the most minute details. Nowadays, I got a general idea where they're going because I have my party's notorious for throwing wrenches in the gears. So I'm like, all right, I'm just going to show up and we're going to improv the hell out of this.
Yeah. That and truly, that is sort of we just did our live show at NoCoCon.
That was so much fun.
A couple of weeks ago. Oh, it was so much fun. But I will tell you, the way I prepared for NoCoCon is vastly different than how I prepare for Unpredicted Party episodes all those years ago in the first like 10 to 15 episodes. And I think it shows. I knew I had a theme. I had some NPCs you were going to meet along the way. But like it truly was a moment of, we're just going to figure out what's there. If you ask to look for something and you roll high enough, yeah, sure, it's there. And then it becomes okay, well, what can I do to sort of further that process? And I think no matter what kind of content you're making, whether it's, a digital piece of art, another like a written form, an audio form, video, whatever you want to use for your medium, so long as you can feel comfortable like winging it a little bit, there's a certain level of, I truly do believe everyone should take improv classes if they want to like be a good creative, because being able to say yes and to someone else's idea without completely shutting it down and like trusting that person, like, all right, we can create something cool together. Yeah.
Well, and you nailed it with like a sense of trust. And I know it's a lot of skill. It's a lot of, just a lot of experience. being, good in improv and all this stuff, and just collaborative storytelling in general. But trust is deeply important. But even more so, I feel like, is that sense of surrender to the process.
Absolutely. And I think I don't want to say giving into the creative process, because that implies that the process is trying to take you hostage or something. But I think there truly is a level of, I think the phrase these days is embracing the cringe, figuring out what makes you the most uncomfortable and sort of going with it. Good example of this. I was doing an improv class. This was way back in like high school when I was doing speech and debate. And it was supposed to be, in my mind, a very serious scene where the prompt was, you're at a funeral. And I'm like, oh, okay, I got to get that going. And I'm like, oh, man. Looks good. They trimmed his beard. I'm like standing at the casket with this other, improv partner, and the my buddy acts as if, he is pantomiming, pulling the beard down, and goes, that's not his beard. They shaved it. And then I rip, and then I'm like, oh, okay. Are we doing that? And I'm like, all right, well, what if I rip off his wig? Well, turns out our buddy's not actually dead. He had faked his own death. So there I am, ready to be like, he was such a good person. No, we are actively searching for clues as to why this guy faked his death and what's wrong with him. And it was like a quick 2 or 3 minute scene. And
but suddenly it's a mystery.
But suddenly we created a murder mystery out of what I thought was going to be this very somber event. And I don't think that would have happened had I not said, all right, let's trust the chaos. That's why I always say, welcome to the chaos, because truly it is a chaos of, somewhat control, because I know you can do it. It's just a question of how you get there.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and it's amazing because we can so often underestimate what somebody else can add. Because we, of course, human beings are pretty arrogant. Just naturally.
For sure.
We're pretty self-absorbed beings, right?
Yeah.
Because of course we're going to think that like whatever I bring into this project is going to be the best. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But like allowing space for other people and allowing that, that collaboration and, surrendering to it. God, like the most amazing moments just in our exchanges have happened when I've just been like, sure, I'll, take the wheel. Let's go.
Yeah. And I think there is a certain level of like prep work that I think you need to do before you can do that.
Do the work.
But that is where but I think the work is the failure in and of itself. The truly being able to look back and say, yeah, that wasn't really what I wanted to do. What would I change differently? And acknowledging that I can't change what the other person is going to bring to the table. Like Zach Smith, our player character who plays Halloweth, has been sort of like the dark and brooding elf. And I wanted to sort of lean into that part with him. But then there are scenes that you have with him where it's like, oh, well, this guy has a levity to it. So I create NPCs that bring out the levity of Zach's character Halloweth, because that truly is where he gets to shine the most, not in his sort of dark broodings, but in that moment where he is forced out of his comfort zone and I am forced out of my comfort zone because, I can do dark brooding elf drama all day. That's Tolkien's wheelhouse. I thrive there. And arguably I could do an entire TTRPG about it. I'm not going to though, because that sounds like way too much work, but there's a certain level of like, almost doing the opposite of what you thought was the best that produces a really good result.
Totally. Well, I feel like this conversation also can be just cut and copied into so many creative outlets of just
for sure.
Risk taking, surrender, but also you got to sow the roots, you got to sow the seeds, you got to really, you got to do the work, you got to show up prepared, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. It's funny. I was talking to Hannah. We were having lunch after we've kind of reconvened after NocoCon, and Hannah and I got us into it. It was the four of us, and we were talking about how, like, if you're listening and you've never played a TTRPG like Dungeons and Dragons or something like that, that is one of the greatest things you could do to your soul, because I feel like it stretches you in ways that you didn't realize. It's you. But it's this character, and you get to experiment with different backgrounds or maybe different alternative futures that you never really thought yourself would. It's an exercise for your empathy almost.
Yeah. And I think that level of empathy is, I don't want to say getting lost, but it definitely seems as though the culture surrounding creativity has kind of become like almost formulaic to an extent, which is why I harp so much on, embracing that kind of chaos. Like, you don't need to have any idea what you're doing. You can discover it along the way. And in fact, I encourage people to discover it along the way by, we say you have to do the work, but I think that only comes after you have failed enough times to know what the work is. Like, what effort do I need to do to be a better digital artist, to be a better writer? What books do I need to read to teach myself what words to use? Am I writing to a 5th grade level or a 50-year-old's level? Is this a spy novel? Is this an action thriller? Is this romance? Like, knowing your way around the space that you want to inhabit is so critical, but ultimately, you have to make a fool of yourself and occasionally be laughed at. I have made so many videos that have either tanked or I have been mocked because of I have made it. And I've learned more about myself in doing all of that.
Totally. Well, and it's good practice of humility, right? Don't take it too seriously.
For sure. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Buddy, this has been amazing. Now, this is the part that I've been really excited for. So this is the moment where my patrons, so I announced that you and I were going to have a conversation, and I announced it to my patrons. And then I asked them, like, what questions would you like to ask Don?
Oh, here we go.
So buckle up, buddy. Here we go.
Let's do it.
This first one comes from Yvonne, an amazing watercolor artist. She's incredible and also wonderful soul. She asks, what is a good lesson or piece of inspiration artists can take away from The Lord of the Rings?
Oh my God. I mean, how many lessons can there be in The Lord of the Rings? You said she does watercolors? I think the lessons, there are so many lessons from The Lord of the Rings, but I think the best thing that you can take from The Lord of the Rings in general is don't do it alone. And I know we've talked about that. And I know that's not necessarily easy for someone that is using, art supplies or, colored pencils, watercolors, markers, paints, whatever the case may be. There is a certain zen that I reach when we are in a session of the Unpredicted Party together where I go, I'm with other people. They got this. And I also occasionally do that as I am prepping for sessions. So if you can find others that give you that moment of zen, even if it's just like go live on Twitch and with your friends and just like interact with one another as you are painting together, or figure out a like-minded group of people on some sort of forum. I used to recommend Reddit, but not anymore. Find something much smaller or go on TikTok, honestly. And just find other people to not do it alone with, even if not doing alone doesn't mean collaboration, but instead means we're all doing our own thing, but we're in a room and we're comfortable. Like, hey, I have a random idea. Does anybody have anything they want to like toss me ideas? And then if you need that kind of help, I will also throw out my own ideas. And yeah, don't do it alone.
Don't do it alone. I love that answer, buddy. Yeah. And you mentioned like, oh yeah, Yvonne is a watercolor artist. It literally could be a bond with the person behind the cash register at the art store where you get watercolor paper and your erasers and all that. You could like talk art. Like, yeah, absolutely. There's community out there waiting for you. If you ever feel like you don't have people to have community with, it's not true.
No, and there absolutely is. I'll give you a great example because the person behind the cash register, when I was doing the Magic the Gathering Lord of the Rings card set, I was in that card shop, my local card shop, so much so that like I just kind of kept talking to these guys, and I go over there and play Warhammer sometimes, or I go over there and just honestly I hang out, I look at the cards for a little bit, we chat, see how we're doing, and then I leave after buying a pack or two of cards, and it's a social aspect more than anything. And I think a lot of people look at like, I don't know, things like the movie Rent or the other tortured soul artist kind of movies. Those are people with very severe mental illnesses that need to seek professional help. The true creative process, I believe, comes from others.
It is.
Don't do it alone.
It's so true. Like, well, I spend most of my entire world alone toiling in my shop. But when I have to fill up my cylinders, my oxygen, my acetylene, my argon, I drive extra far because I have a friendship with who fills the cylinders. His name is Tom. I'm so excited to talk wherever the hell we end up talking about. Like forging bonds with people is so fundamental to your humanity. We all have it. Everybody.
Yeah. It's quite literally the power of friendship. I digress.
Yeah. Oh, buddy. Yeah. Okay. The next one, you know scones.
Yeah, I know scone.
This one comes from her.
What do we got from scone?
All right. So, and this also involves Nat 20 wife.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So, a little call out. What was the meal that made you realize you were in love with Nat?
Oh my God. That is the first time anyone's ever asked. What a great question.
Great question. Why do you think I'm so excited for this part?
Oh my God. Yeah. Hang on. Think of mine. I got to think about this. Yeah. Okay. So, Nat and I started dating in college. We were long distance for the first 18 months. And I don't think it was the first time she came to visit at my university. I think it was the second time. We had been, I think, officially dating for maybe like 2 months at the time. And we had seen each other in person and like we knew each other in high school. So like there was at least a familiarity there. But I didn't have any money to like take her out to dinner that weekend. I didn't get paid until the next weekend. And I was like, listen, I very much want to take you out to a nice fancy dinner. I don't really have that. And so I made her, I think I made spaghetti and meatballs from what we had left in the fridge. And she ate it and she's like, that was pretty good. And the fact that she didn't necessarily ghost me after that, I was like, oh, this person tolerates me at points in my life when I am not my best. In fact, it might be considered some of my worst because it was not good. Like it was just some pasta and some frozen meatballs from the grocery store down the street. And I think at that point I was like, she's not gone yet. What does this mean? Does she like me? I think she likes me. And like we had kissed. It was like we were very much like in a relationship, but I was still very much in that like, okay, does she like me? Is this real? Like what's happening? And so yeah, I think
that's
that
wonderful.
Wow, what a great question.
That's a good one.
Love that one.
Well,
Thank you, Scott.
Oh, I like the idea that we're always getting better, right? We're always a fine wine. And I every time I think back to like when I first met, like with like Casey and I or something like that, I'm like, oh God, I'm like practically a different person.
Oh, I
can't believe she stuck around for that. Oh,
yeah.
Ready for the next one, buddy?
Go for it.
Now this one, another familiar name here, Apex, our historian. On a scale of 1 to 10. How taken aback were you by the number of people that came to NocoCon for the unpredicted party?
10. When James from NocoCon first reached out to me and said, hey, we want to have you, Don Marshall, as a guest. By the way, you'll be playing a TTRPG on the main stage and it's going to be great. I'm like, cool. However, how do you feel about this already well-established TTRPG with a relatively small following, all things considered, being on your main stage? And I think James saw it as an opportunity to bring people to the con. And what I saw it as an opportunity, it was to bring all of my friends together under one roof, and nobody was going to show up because it's a small con in the middle of upstate New York. And then we get there. And it's the first day, and I don't think I took a breath for the first like 6 hours of that con. There were people there that had driven from Iowa, from Canada, that were flying in from places, not just to meet us, but to meet other people that are in the live chat and in the Discord, and they're rooming together and they're texting each other and they're friends and they're having relationships outside of the internet space that we created 2.5 years ago. And it is probably one of the most rewardingly creative things I've ever done. It's also the most exhausting. So like, I get why people charge, money to like sign autographs and interact with people now. I had a lot of preconceived notions about like stardom and like the hoity-toityness, but like it truly takes a lot out of you. And I think partially because it is that overwhelming sense of, oh, you guys really like what we do. How do I keep this up? There is almost like an external pressure that I felt. Now, I'm in therapy and have actively working through that. And like the creative process has not necessarily changed for me, but I think there is a certain line that I didn't know I crossed when I got to NocoCon, in that people like what you do sometimes. And it's an incredibly humbling experience. I had a guy come up to me and say, "Hi, I did not know that you were going to be here, but I drove 6 hours this weekend to come and see you." And I couldn't.
Isn't that unreal?
I couldn't. Yeah, there's a guy that did a Beery cosplay of the character you created. Yeah, like that. What was that like?
That was wild, dude. Well, because like I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I just like, this is the first time I've ever done any type of acting or especially an accent in front of the freaking internet, a silly accent. So there's a lot of firsts for me, but it harkens back to our, earlier conversation about just throw the pasta against the wall. You never know. You might get a wife for sure, right? With the frozen meatballs.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's so true. But truly it is just, don't throw a billion ideas out, because sometimes it gets a little bit cluttered. But like,
yeah, because if you never know, 5 might work out and then you don't have the time.
Yeah, exactly. And like, if you had told me, oh, by the way, the Unpredicted Party is going to be popular enough that you'll get invited to a con and people will drive to watch you all play live.
And dude,
I mean,
how fun was that? I got such a performer's high out of it. I was flying. I mean, let's do that more often.
Oh, for sure.
When we get big, let's just do that all the time.
Well, no, that's the thing though. And I'll call you on it actually, Max. We're already big. In my mind, the Unpredicted Party has the audience it was always meant to have, because I did what I set out to do in, creating this alternate universe and having people watch it and, getting friends out of it. It seems kind of cheesy, but honest to God, I think the true creative process is figuring out how you can be friends with all of these cool people. Like, I still get comments in my comment section when I post Unpredicted Party stuff. It's like, man, I wish we were friends. And like, I am sure you are a great person. I do not doubt that you are fun. I don't know you. And so for me to try and put in that effort after you've already expressed that sentiment, it changes the dynamic. I think there's a certain level of like unassumingness you have to go into it with, of like, yeah, we might not get anything out of this except, some fun memories of playing a TTRPG together.
It's been great.
The fact that I get to play with you in person at a con and have people watch, there's nothing like it. There's nothing like it.
It's tremendous. All right, ready for the next question?
Sorry, that was a 10. I could have just said 10 and moved on, but
now this next one comes from Neil. What was it like running a game for Brennan Lee Mulligan?
I think there is a certain level of oh God, I don't necessarily know if I have the words, but sometimes you just kind of have to, oh God, what was it like? I'll equate it to this. I'm going to go a little fanboy on this, but I think this might sort of reveal sort of a little bit of the true creative process. The reason I was able to get Brennan on the show is because he knew me before I knew him. I showed him, or no, he was shown one of my videos that I had made about like, I can beat him in a Lord of the Rings thing. And then I'm at Gen Con and he turns around and I'm about to introduce myself and he goes, "Oh, you're Don Marshall." And that, I kind of blacked out after that. Thank God my wife and my friend Christina were both recording at the time, because I don't think I would have remembered what he had said otherwise. But in being sort of recognized by somebody whose creativity you admire and want to mirror so much is incredibly rewarding. And I don't say that as like, oh, I'm such a big fan of his work. I truly do believe that like I've taken a lot of my cues of how to be a DM from Matt Mercer, from Brendan Lee Mulligan, from friends of mine, Kevin Parr, all of these great DMs that exist in the space. But to be able to, have that moment is both incredibly nerve-wracking, but at the same time, there is a certain level of confidence that I got in myself the second before I pressed record. And I went, do you know how many people would want to be in my position right now to feel those nerves? And I consider it a blessing. I consider it truly not from a higher power, but just from circumstances, dumb luck, the power of friendship, and parties at Gen Con sometimes.
It's all the above, buddy.
Yeah. And not to like see like, oh my God, I always wanted to have Brennan. Like I had no conception that Brennan would even want to be on it. And to a certain extent, there was a possible, fear that I had as soon as I sent that email, like, hey, Brennan, do you want to come on? They'd be like, oh, is Brennan going to overshadow my players? Am I going to, overshadow it? And is it just going to be he and I? Is one of my players going to, not be able to hold their own and freak out and be embarrassed? And like all of these thoughts went through my head. But of course, I am my own worst critic. I do it to myself. And at the end of the day, I just had to keep reminding myself, Brennan poops just like I do. Brennan has those same thoughts and feelings and anxieties, maybe not the exact same ones, but like he is a creative person. I know that he goes through a lot of the same things that I do just by being a creative person. So like the anxiety that I felt, he might have also felt at some point in his life or a different way. And that's true of anybody I work with.
Yes.
The fact that he is a well-known name added a little bit of pressure to not screw it up in a public forum. But at the end of the day, I think I just needed to remind myself, he's just a guy.
Just a guy.
It's like that Hades line from Hercules. He's just a guy.
Wonderful. So is Mercer.
Yeah.
Like I would die to meet these people like this. Oh my God. Anyways, but it's good. It's good to remind yourself to not let yourself get too disillusioned. Like they're just people wanting to have a good time and make something cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And that takes a lot of work to do. And so that's why I recommend people start small. Don't have Brendan Lee Mulligan at your first table. That would be a disaster.
Would not recommend. You ready for the next one, buddy?
No.
We got two.
Bring it. All right.
There, we got a twofer for Scone.
Okay.
All right. What is your, oh gosh, I can't believe I'm going to say this. What is your favorite beery moment so far in the campaign?
Oh my God.
Do I need to plug my ears for this? Is this too self-serving?
No. Hang on. You know what's great? Beery has had so many wonderful moments and most of them are comedic, but the best truly well acted moments of improv come when the funny character does something, heartfelt and makes you cry. I think the scene between you, there's two scenes that I think, and it was the moments that I knew that this was going to be something great, not necessarily because of the size of the audience, but because of what we created together.
Oh yeah.
When you're at the funeral episode and you have the body swap moment, what I assumed was going to be just like a fun little, the gang gets into trouble with the guest kind of moment, brought a few of us to tears. And it is the other side of that is the moment you have with Charlotte much later on the boat, when you take something as nondescript. I gave Beery, your character, a ring thinking nothing of it. There would just be some lore attached to it. You could use that ring in any way you so choose. And the creativity that you chose to do combined with what Charlotte did, and I don't want to spoil it too much if you haven't seen it yet, but there are moments when the mundane are transformed into the extraordinary. And I think that is truly what Beery brings to the table, as not just as a blacksmith, but as a character.
Oh, buddy. Well,
kudos.
Well, I don't know what to do with my hands now. But
you're being perceived, Max.
God. Well, thank you, buddy. In those moments really take me by surprise too. You know, it's wild what unfolds when you get creative minds in this like flow state together. It's really a cool process. I highly suggest it. And that goes back to creating community and thinking of ideas together, because you could take that home and do whatever with it.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
All right.
Like I'm going to steal a bunch of the Unpredicted Party stuff for my home games.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
The final question
what else we got?
Comes from Catherine. First, she wants to thank you for sharing your passion and creativity with us all. Catherine's the biggest sweetheart ever.
Yeah.
What about your creative process brings you the most joy?
There was a moment, I'll give you an example before I break it down into the emotions. There was a moment at NocoCon where the four of you and our various significant others that were there were signing autographs. This is within that 6 hour sort of rush where everybody came to meet us at a certain point. And I was just taking a small break, just being like, I need some water. I need to step away. I went back into the green room. I came back out. My wife is there and we're in like a little hockey rink player's booth. And she's standing right by the little half door that I open. And I look over at you all and I look at my wife and she goes, look what we did. And I think at the end of the day, the thing I am most proud of is the things that I did, which is not to say that like it's any one thing, but rather the thing that is most fulfilling to me is being able to look back on the hard work that I have put in, the people I have surrounded myself with, those that I have attempted to bring up with me. And I don't mean up in terms of degree of success. I mean up in the, let us create something beautiful together, being able to reach a not the pinnacle, but rather a pinnacle. There are so many mountains out there that I want to climb, but that moment of look what we did was a peak. And I am grateful for those peaks. I also acknowledge that I need to go back down the mountain to climb another one. So,
well, the beauty about peaks,
my next goal is the next.
You can now see new ones.
Yeah. It made me realize, oh shoot, we could do another live show. It doesn't need to be at a small con. We could do this at Gen Con. We could do this wherever we wanted to. We've got the talent. We've got the skill. We've got lucky enough to have a fan base that is,
it's amazing.
Just the most passionate group of people I've had the pleasure of involving myself with. So thank you to all of you listening that have been there. And if you're just starting being in that group, buckle up because it's a lot.
The first 10 episodes are rough. I swear we get into
listen. Nobody knows what we're doing, but actually, you know what? It's funny you mentioned that because there's someone by the name of Lisha who is in our Discord and in our live chat. And Lisha says, yeah, you guys were a little bit different until episode 13. And I went, hang on, what? What do you mean episode 13? Because I always attribute the moment of, okay, we're really into it now, as 2 points. One, when Justin said, hit it, and threw the sword at the bad guy you were fighting. And the funeral episode, the one that I mentioned previously, where you do the body swap with the wizard potion. But Lisha said, well, no, it was that moment when Halloweth kicked down the door Emperor's New Groove style. You stopped taking it so seriously and Halloweth finally let up and you were like, okay, we can have fun here. And it was so great to be able to see like, okay, this is when people acknowledge, like it's different for everyone. Like this is when we started to have fun. Well, no, it was actually this moment for me because XYZ. And like, it's so cool to see people's perspectives on what we created. It's very rewarding.
Well, and that's like the best part about art is it's no longer yours once it's out there, once it's created, and now it takes a life of its own, be how it's perceived, right? The eye of the beholder. I think
I'm a big fan of like Death of the Author, in that like once you put something out into the world, it exists not just for you anymore. That being said, I would like to clarify that, in that if you are still alive and your work is still affecting the lives of people, it is okay to provide clarification. I will occasionally go into the live chat and be like, yeah, I couldn't edit this moment out, but this is sort of what I was going for, because sometimes I say things that don't translate well, but they made sense in my head, but other people's brains are different than mine, thank God. But I think there's a certain responsibility creators have to maintain the same level of like consistency. And some people call it branding, some people call it theming. But like, yeah, I think to be a creative, you have to be able to provide feedback and receive feedback, whether it is positive or negative.
I like that. I like that a lot. Oh man, I love to hear about your joy. Man, we've been talking about surrender, the creative process. And like, dude, like Don, I am so grateful for this expose into your mind. This has been great.
Thank you for letting me ramble for an hour and a half. This has been delightful to do.
It's truly been a delight. And like, I love you, buddy. And all of you, I'm really grateful for the viewer, just having this community, you know, like especially a community that we both share. So this has just been great. And, you know, this is one of many conversations that we get to enjoy with each other, buddy.
Yeah. What Max does not tell you is that we have technically already filmed an episode of this podcast, but it was 3 years ago with a bunch of other people. And I called it Tipsy Tolkien.
But we're not tipsy. Dang it.
We're not. No, well, we'll get to that later, but there's something to be said about like, oh yeah, a podcast with Max. That sounds awesome. A podcast with Lauren does cosplay. That sounds awesome. But like, you grow and you learn and you mature and you create these things, and like, Tipsy Tolkien is done. Like, I haven't filmed an episode in 2.5 years, but I love coming on podcast stuff with you. And so like, figure out like what we want to do, and then don't be afraid to change the font or change the text color, or, you know, change it up a little, do it in a different language.
Make it weird.
Make it weird. If you take nothing else from this podcast, make it weird.
Right on, everybody. Well, thank you for
make it real quick. Make it : weird.
There it is. There it is. Perfect.
Sorry.
No, you're good. I just want to thank you all for watching or listening, wherever you're enjoying this little conversation. And Don, please tell the good people where they can find you.
Absolutely. I am Don Marshall 72. That's the number 72 across all platforms. My primary platform is TikTok. I am also on YouTube, where you can find The Unpredicted Party. The podcast version is there as well on all of the major podcasting platforms. I do any and everything related to Lord of the Rings and fantasy. And I have a Patreon where for just $2 a month or $20 a year, you can help me keep the lights on and fund the next project that will fund the next project. Max, thank you for having me over on your side of the internet. It's a pleasure to sort of peer into your mind as well. And thanks for having me.
All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.